I did not watch NFL football yesterday. Actually, this is in keeping with what I've been doing over the last couple of months, and that is I've checked in on two games all year long because one of my teams has not one player on the team has taken a knee or sat down. That's Minnesota. And a couple of games this year I tuned in, and when I saw that the other team was also behaving, I decided to catch a little bit of the game. But otherwise, I have discovered that on Sundays I have a lot of free time now that I didn't have normally during autumn. And I came home yesterday, and well, when I got home from church, the Vikings had played early already, but uh, that game was over with, and so I just didn't bother with any other football during the course of the day. However, a lot of my friends that I went to school with, and I've got to remind you, while I grew up in a state that is known as being a very liberal place, that's because it's controlled by one large geographic area, New York City, which I grew up. If you were to drive from my hometown to New York, it would take you 8 or 9 hours. It's like from driving from here to Coeur d'Alene. It's a huge difference. And where I grew up, it was all dairy farms, apple orchards, and even some good muckland that they grew potatoes on. It was very Republican as well. I'm telling you, I kid you not. If you took an old fashioned phone booth and you put it out on a corner in most of the towns in that area, the Democrats could have caucused in those phone booths. There were so few of them. I knew just two Democrats when I was growing up as a kid. They lived around the block from us. He was a professor of music at a local college, although I should point out it was a Wesleyan college and it wasn't a very liberal college, and his wife was the county chairwoman for the Democrat Party. They were the only two Democrats, as I say, that I knew in my hometown growing up, my mother's hometown, which was 5 miles away. Two of the local Democrats decided to call a meeting one night, and they went down and they opened up the town hall. They got it reserved, and they went in there. Their name was Lucas. I remember them well. Went to school with their daughters, and they were very nice people. But they went in and they sat down, and nobody else showed up for the meeting. So they waited an hour. They locked up the town hall, and then the next day they drove to the county seat. And deciding better to fight, or rather to join them than fight them, they switched party registration to Republican. So that's how conservative Republican an area I grew up in, and that's how it happens to be. And it's also what you might call a very patriotic area as well. But we talk about people in media who live within bubbles. Your East Coast media and your West Coast media think that everybody else in America goes along with all of their liberal ideas, and then they're shocked when they find out it's not the case. Sometimes those of us who actually work in conservative media, we may end up in the same bubble as well, because most of my connections on Facebook and on Twitter and on these other social media platforms are people who think a lot like me. The callers to this radio station generally we're preaching to the choir. You get a handful of dissent, but we're generally preaching to the choir. So I assume that most Americans are deeply offended by NFL players who refuse to stand during the national anthem. In my view, I like football, but I love my country, and two great representations of my country, first of all, are the flag, and the national anthem is a song to that flag, is a celebration of that flag and what it meant. I was shocked yesterday when I noticed I was looking at my Facebook feed, and I had some friends I went to school with who'd gone to an NFL football game, and they were all excited and happy about it. And I asked them why. And then I started getting comments from friends of mine who I know to be conservative Republicans saying, well, I don't care if somebody takes a knee or not. What? And now they're not very happy with me today because I really lit into them. And I shared with them that when I was younger, I used to have a fairly strong liberal streak sometimes. Wasn't what I'd call overwhelming. Well, more of a libertarian streak where I said, all right, I don't necessarily like what everybody does, but if they want to be stupid, go ahead. It's their choice. And I can remember back in the late 1980s, there was an effort in Congress to pass an amendment that would have banned the burning of the American flag. And the courts have said, well, that's freedom of speech. So we can't ban the burning of the American flag. Now, if somebody decides to burn one inside, then you can get them on an arson charge. And if they burn it in a space outdoors where they could also harm something else by setting an open fire, they could face charges for that. But there's no law against desecrating the flag. and we never got that constitutional amendment. And at the time, I thought, okay, if some moron wants to do it, they're very few. Let them do it and ignore them. And then one day, this must have been about 1990 or 91, I got an assignment, and I had to go to a picnic of Iwo Jima survivors, some Marines who'd been on that island back in February through April of 1945. If you don't recall your history, a huge number of those Marines never left that island. Thousands of them were killed. One of the bloodiest battles of World War II from the perspective of the Americans. And I went to interview these men, and we got into a conversation about the importance of the flag. There have been movies made about it. There are books, and perhaps the most famous photograph in American history happens to be those Marines and that sailor. He was a corpsman. They're corpsmen. They were raising the American flag. Now, some people claim it's staged. That's not true. There were two flags that were raised that day. One wasn't as big, and then there were orders to raise a larger flag, and Joe Rosenthal, the AP photographer, just caught it at the right moment, the second flag going up. But when I talked to these men who'd been there, now you've got to remember they were fighting on a heap of volcanic ash. There was very little cover anywhere on that island. The Japanese had dug in, and they were oftentimes, you couldn't see them. So you're out and you're in the middle of nowhere with very few trees, very little vegetation, nothing to hide behind. All you could try to do is scrape some of that ash out of the way and crawl down in it as far as you could to save your life. So you're witnessing men who are being blown to bits next to you, who are being shot, who are dying instantly or screaming and writhing in pain sometimes for hours. I read the book Flags of Our Fathers by this Bradley fellow who told the story. His dad was one of the flag raisers, and his dad told the story about what the Japanese would do to Americans that they captured on the island. I won't describe it. It was absolutely beyond the pale. These old men, tougher than nails, U.S. Marines, when they got to talking about what happened when that flag went up, and they were still under constant fire, they heard the bleating of horns from ships offshore because the sailors were watching this enormous flag go up on Mount Suribachi, and they all hit their horns in celebration. And these old men, some of them, burst into tears when they told me what it meant to them when they looked up and they saw that flag unfurled and flying above the island. Now, many Americans think that was the end of the battle. It wasn't. It lasted for 2 more bloody months. But they knew when they saw that flag go up that they were on the side not just of might, but of right. Every time when I see these players on the sidelines and they are lollygagging and sitting down and raising their fists and doing all of this other baloney, it infuriates me in light of what I learned from those old men that I interviewed some nearly 30 years ago about their situation and their experience in life. None of which we will never, in this day and age, most of us will never experience anything like that. We have no idea what it's like. And I tried to impress on my old friends yesterday that, I like football too. It's not easy for me to stay away from it, but I'm doing it. And that there are greater things that we have to be aware of. Every time you buy a ticket, or you buy your team's hat, or you buy a T-shirt with your team logo on it, or you turn on the television and you get measured as part of the audience, you're putting money into the NFL and telling them that that's okay, that these people disrespect the flag and the anthem. You're telling them you're fine with that. That's what you're doing. And you're disrespecting everything those men gave their lives for on that little tiny island in the Pacific Ocean some 72 years ago. That's what you're doing. And if you don't care, then it's the end of the United States as we've known it. Because if you don't care, what the heck? It's all about you. Your football team is more important than your country. Then, I'm going to shake the dust off my shoes and leave you behind. It just galls me. Now you've got students. This is a story from KGW out of Portland, Oregon. You've got students now who are protesting by kneeling during the national anthem at high school football games. One of them told a reporter, she said, there are times I couldn't hang out with certain people because of my skin color. You're kidding me. You're kidding me. There are people I couldn't hang out with in high school either because I didn't hang out with the right crowd. It didn't make me happy maybe at the time, but I learned to live with it. I grew up and I got on with my life. For crying out loud, take a Valium, whatever you need, but maybe they just don't want to hang out with you because you're a total. It's 9:16, excuse me. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. We're at 39. Telephone number 208-736-0300. And we have a caller joining us this morning. You're next on Top Story on KLIX.
Good morning, Bill. It's an excellent show as always.
Thank you.
When I was a young boy growing up, the one man that made such an impact on me and I had the utmost respect was my neighbor, who in World War II was part of the 101 Airborne Division. He jumped 10 times behind enemy lines in Germany. And the stories that man would tell me, it shook me to my feet. I tell you what, it made such an impact on me. Now, I was never fortunate enough to serve, but out of respect to that man and every fallen hero and everyone that has served for this great country, I refuse to be a part, like you mentioned, of that NFL. It's disgusting that we hold in such low regard the flag and what this country has offered every one of us who live here. If these millionaires who are playing a child's game want to make an impact, why don't they go on a hunger strike?
Well said.
Period.
Well said. And, you bring up something that I was reading this morning. I think it's Peter Heck Writes for The Resurgent, which is Eric Erickson's website, said, and thank you for the call, he said something along the lines of, you can't get a straight answer out of what the protest is about. You can't even get a straight answer out of what they want out of the protest. You're up next. You're on the air at 9:18 on Top Story. Go ahead.
Yeah, good morning, Bill. Thanks for taking my call. Our last caller nailed it. He nailed it. See, there's people like us that have respect for the flag, that have respect for the country, that love our country. But then you got the folks on the other side that say, like, the football players have this right. Of course, they're the same people that say a woman has the right to have a little baby killed. They're heartless. These people have absolutely no soul to them. And I don't understand how anybody can support the NFL. My son is probably as big a Viking fan as there is in the world. He loves that team. And that's why I'm so glad that they aren't taking a knee. But for the people to support them, you can't do it and be a true American. I mean, you got to draw the line someplace. If anybody gets a chance, watch that movie Hacksaw Ridge about Desmond Doss. I didn't know who Desmond Doss was until that show came on, and it takes a little bit to get me to tear up. I'm telling you what, that show will do it. That shows that there's a guy that will put nothing ahead of country, nothing. And but that's what our country used to have. These guys in World War II you were talking about, they were willing to give everything and come home and just want to get a job and go to work and take care of their families. But no, but Bill, like always, you're spot on correct when you talk like this. This country is hurting, and until people pull their heads out, it's not going to end.
Well said. Well said. I thank you for the call. We've got to take a short break, but I've got a little bit more on this subject and more of your telephone calls just on the other side of the break on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. We're at 37. There was a story over the weekend that came out of New Jersey. Associated Press reported a father and son who would officiate a high school football game Friday night walked off the field after members of one team knelt during the national anthem. And it wasn't a surprise. The two referees had told the coaches, if anybody does this, we're leaving. And it happened. They left. Some lily-livered, panty-waist newspaper liberal puke columnist from some newspaper in New Jersey is now saying that they need to be fired for good from refereeing. Why? Because they stood up for the flag. How dare they walk? It's a football game, for crying out loud. If they walk away, so what? There are bigger matters at play here. And yet for the liberals, what's the big deal? I like to urinate on the American flag every day, especially when I'm going into the little girl's potty on days I think I'm a girly, and then I go in and urinate on it there next to your little girl. Isn't diversity good? 9:23. Can't do that voice any longer. My throat doesn't agree. 9:23. I assume that newspaper columnist goes out trolling for little boys with Kevin Spacey. Who knows? Telephone number for reaching our show today, 208-736-0300. That's 208-736-0300. We're up to 40 on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Top story with Bill Colley. And I know we have some of these fans in the area, these bandwagon types. I know for a fact because I've talked to people locally. Before they were very good, and it took a long time before the Seattle Seahawks were good. The big teams in this area generally were San Francisco and Oakland, Denver. But then when the Seahawks actually went out and won a Super Bowl, all of a sudden it was like, yeah, I'm a fan, sure, yeah. Although nobody paid any attention to them before that. Michael Bennett, who's one of the biggest loudmouths on that team. First of all, Bennett is a bald-faced liar. When he was at the Mayweather fight in Las Vegas a couple of months ago, you may remember he claimed that police roughed him up. He'd been at an event, and after he got out of the fight, was hanging around with some hoodlums, friends on the street, and there was a backfire. Somebody assumed it was a gunshot, so police were investigating. He ran. Well, police are investigating what could be a gunshot, and they see somebody running. What are they going to do? Hey, have a nice day. See you later. They stopped him, and they subdued him. When it became clear he had nothing to do with it, they let him go. He claimed that they'd roughed him up and that they were doing it was racial profiling, etc., etc., etc. Then the body cam footage came out. The video from the body cams prove that he is nothing but a bald-faced liar. They were extremely polite in their dealings with him. Well, he's now saying he's equating the NFL to slavery. This is Peter Heck writing at theresurgent.com this morning. Real cultural appropriation is when privileged 21st century athletes whose culture is defined by lavish opulence and absurd prosperity appropriate the agony of 19th century slaves to themselves just so that they can play the victim, grievance monger, garner attention, self-promote, and race bait for more profit. I think that is very well said. And I've got to point out another one of these. Bruce Maxwell, catcher for the Oakland A's. He was the only baseball player to take a knee during the national anthem as the baseball season, regular season, was winding down. Then a few weeks ago, he claimed that he was racially profiled in a restaurant. Well, he lied. It turns out that everyone else who was there said, nope, he's angry because he had a friend with him. The friend didn't have ID. They wouldn't serve his friend a beer. So now he's claiming, oh, they don't like us because we're not white. No, it's because you didn't have ID. He got arrested over the weekend, if you have not yet heard. A woman came to make a delivery at her house, and he waved a pistol at her. I hope. Unfortunately, Joe Arpaio isn't there any longer to dress him in a nice pink and white jumpsuit, but I hope he gets to spend some time locked away contemplating his lies. 9:27, we have a caller with us on Top Story. Number is 208-736-0300. Caller, you're up next.
Good morning, Bill. Can I mention something a little bit off the subject here that I wanted to ask you about? Take a minute. Have you ever heard of a lady by the name of Sarah Ophelia Polly?
Minnie Pearl.
Oh, you knew? Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
Is that your relative?
No.
Okay.
Not at all. Although the name is spelled exactly the same.
It is exactly the same?
Yeah.
Or it's not?
It is spelled exactly the same.
Okay. Well, I just read about her autobiography. It's very interesting. Anyway, well, okay, that's the extent of my problem. Thanks.
All right. Hey, thank you for the call. Yeah, Minnie Pearl, of course, she was, her maiden name, Colley, Colley. Her married name was Cannon. But the name Colley is actually, you can find it in multiple different countries. You can even find it in Brittany, which is a old Gaelic-speaking part of France. My family's not from there. In England, the word Colley, the name Colley, Colley, actually comes from the Welsh, who, of course, are living on the same island. And in Welsh Gaelic, the word Colley means black, which is why you get coal and collier, and that all comes from that. And in the song, the original song, 12 Days of Christmas, it's not four calling birds. That was changed because nobody knew what four collie birds meant. Well, 4 collie birds was 4 blackbirds. And then in Scotland, you see the same name, although probably not the same family, and it is often spelled like the dog with an IE on the end. And then if you go over to Ireland, you've got 2 sets of collie families. You've got one from Dublin, and they were involved, some of them, with the Easter Rising in 1916. I'm not sure that they're related because some of the collies in Dublin, in Ireland, actually migrated from England in the 1500s, and their name had been Cowley, Cowley, and then eventually it morphed into collie. And then if you go to Western Ireland, Connemara, where my folks are from, the name collie looks to come down. Actually, it got anglicized or it got confused with the collies in Dublin, but comes down from Gilcooly or Kilcooly. And it may not even be that, because in the old Gaelic, the pronunciation might even be more, well, I can't even pronounce a lot of Gaelic. You do that, you twist your tongue around, it gets sprained, and you can't talk for 6 weeks. Which is funny because the Irish, you can't shut them up. And you know that because if you just read Newsweek last week, there was a guy who asked, how come all of the right-wing blowhards are Irish Catholics? I don't know. It's because we're smarter than everybody else. 9:30, 37 right now on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. I got more coming up. Have you heard about this church in Virginia? George Washington went there. Now they're trying to erase any records of his attendance. Well, what did he ever do?